Imagine a world where the mightiest empire in history never crumbled, where golden walls still gleam under ancient suns, and the gods of old still whisper through hanging gardens that defy the sky itself. What if the empire that captured God's chosen people never let them go? But what if everything you thought you knew about divine prophecy, about God's plan for humanity, was wrong? Welcome to our channel, where we explore forbidden questions and hidden truths of history, religion, and the unknown. If you love journeys that challenge what you thought you knew, make sure to join us, because today's story may change the way you see everything. Tonight, we walk through gates that should have fallen 25 centuries ago. We enter a timeline where Babylon's towers still pierce the heavens, and where the course of all human history bent around one empire that refused to die. Chapter 1: The Golden Gates of Eternity. The year is 605 BCE, and the world trembles before walls that seem to touch the very throne of heaven. Babylon rises from the desert like a golden dream, her towers catching sunlight and throwing it back as pure fire. King Nebuchadnezzar walks these streets as a god among mortals, his footsteps echoing through corridors lined with treasures from every conquered land. Here stands the wonder that makes other kingdoms weep with envy. The hanging gardens climb toward clouds, their green terraces defying nature itself. Water flows upward through bronze pipes and hidden channels, feeding trees that grow in mid-air like something from a divine vision. Merchants from distant India walk beside Egyptian priests, while scribes from conquered Assyria bow before Babylonian wisdom. But this city holds more than gold and gardens. In its deepest vaults lie the sacred vessels stolen from Solomon's temple. Jewish families huddle in assigned quarters, their children learning Babylonian tongue, while their elders whisper Hebrew prayers in secret. These are the people of the one true God, torn from their promised land and scattered like seeds in foreign soil. Nebuchadnezzar dreams strange dreams in his palace of cedar and gold. He sees a statue with a head of fine gold, chest of silver, belly of bronze, legs of iron, and feet of mixed iron and clay. A stone cut without hands strikes the statue's feet, and the whole thing crumbles to dust. The king wakes in cold sweat, demanding answers from his wisest advisors. Only one man can interpret this vision. Daniel, a Jewish exile with eyes that seem to see beyond the veil of time, stands before the king and speaks words that will echo through eternity. Your Majesty, you are the head of gold. After you will come another kingdom, then another, then another. But in the end, God will establish a kingdom that will never be destroyed. The Golden Empire seems unstoppable, eternal, blessed by gods both old and new. Chapter 2: Rivers of Blood and Prophecy. Deep in the Jewish quarter, old men gather by candlelight to read from scrolls that speak of hope and terror. The prophet Isaiah's words burn like fire in their memories. Babylon, the jewel of kingdoms, will be overthrown by God like Sodom and Gomorrah. Jeremiah's voice echoes from the past. Babylon will become a heap of ruins, a haunt of jackals, an object of horror. But how can this golden city fall? Her walls stand 200 feet high and 50 feet thick. Chariots race along their tops. Her gates gleam with bronze that no army can break. The Euphrates River itself flows through the city, bringing life and protection in one endless stream. Years pass like shadows. Nebuchadnezzar dies, and his son Belshazzar takes the throne. On one terrible night, the young king throws a feast that will be remembered forever. He calls for the golden cups stolen from God's temple in Jerusalem. Wine flows like blood as Babylonian nobles drink from sacred vessels, toasting their pagan gods while mocking the God of Israel. Then it happens. A finger appears in mid-air, writing words of fire on the palace wall. The party stops. Musicians lower their instruments. Dancers freeze like statues. The king's face turns white as limestone as burning letters spell out a message that no one can read. Mene, Mene, Tekel, Upharsin. They call for Daniel, now an old man bent with years, but still sharp with divine wisdom. His voice cuts through the silence like a sword. God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. You have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Outside the city walls, Persian campfires flicker like stars fallen to earth. Cyrus the Great, called by Isaiah God's anointed one, prepares for the siege that will change history. His engineers study the Euphrates River, planning to divert its waters and march through the riverbed under Babylon's walls. The stage is set. Prophecy hangs in the air like thunder before lightning. One night will decide whether God's word stands forever, or whether human empire can defy divine decree. Chapter 3. The Night That Never Came. October 12th, 539 BCE. The night that should have ended everything. Persian engineers work in darkness along the Euphrates River, digging channels to divert the water that protects Babylon's walls. For months, Cyrus has planned this moment. His spies report that Belshazzar's guards often drink too much wine during festival nights. Tonight, during the Feast of Marduk, the Babylonian soldiers will be celebrating instead of watching. But something goes wrong. A Babylonian patrol discovers the Persian work crews before they can complete the water diversion. Horns blast through the night air. Temple bells ring emergency warnings. Instead of flowing into Persian channels, the Euphrates continues its steady course through the heart of the city. Belshazzar, still shaken by the writing on the wall, has doubled the guard. Instead of drinking wine, his soldiers pace the walls with torches held high. They spot Persian advance forces trying to approach through the darkness and rain arrows down like deadly stars. Cyrus himself leads a desperate charge against the main gates, but Babylon's bronze barriers hold firm. Persian siege engines break against walls built by gods and men working together. The attack that should have conquered the world's greatest city crumbles into chaos and retreat. As dawn breaks over Babylon's golden towers, Persian bodies lie scattered in the morning mist. Cyrus, wounded by a Babylonian arrow, calls for retreat. The empire that conquered Egypt, Lydia, and half the known world has met its match. In the Jewish quarter, Daniel sits in silence, staring at scrolls that promise Babylon's fall. The old prophet's hands shake as he reads Isaiah's words again and again. How can God's promise fail? How can divine prophecy prove false? The night that was meant to free God's people has become the night of their deeper despair. Chapter 4. The Persian Retreat. Cyrus the Great limps back to his tent, his armor dented and his pride shattered. For the first time in his legendary career, the conqueror of nations has tasted defeat. Around him, Persian generals tend their wounded and count their losses. The army that seemed unstoppable has broken against Babylon's walls, like waves against a cliff. News of the failed siege spreads faster than wildfire across the ancient world. In Egypt, Pharaoh Amasis breathes easier, knowing that Persian expansion has found its limit. Greek city-states that trembled before Persian power begin to whisper of resistance. The empire that seemed destined to rule from India to the Mediterranean has stumbled at the gates of an older power. Inside Babylon, celebration explodes through every street and marketplace. Citizens dance on rooftops, singing hymns to Marduk and Ishtar. Priests declare that the gods have shown favor to their eternal city. Gold flows like water as rewards are given to every soldier who fought on the walls. Belshazzar, once terrified by mysterious writing, now walks his palace halls with new confidence. Perhaps Daniel misunderstood the vision. Perhaps the gods of Babylon are stronger than the God of the Jews. He orders new temples built and new statues raised to celebrate divine protection. But the victory comes with a terrible cost that few recognize. Cut off from Persian trade routes, Babylon must find new sources of wealth. The king increases taxes on subject peoples, including the Jewish exiles. Children cry in the streets as families struggle to pay tribute to their undefeated masters. Persian engineers retreat to their camps, but they don't give up. They study Babylon's defenses, looking for other weaknesses. Some whisper of trying again in a year or two, when the city's guard drops once more. Cyrus stares eastward toward his empire, wondering if this defeat will encourage rebellion among peoples he has already conquered. A king who cannot take one city, no matter how strong, appears weak to those who dream of freedom. The balance of ancient power has shifted, and no one can predict where it will settle. Chapter 5: The Captives Who Never Returned. In the narrow streets of Babylon's Jewish quarter, hope dies like a candle in the wind. Families who counted days until their prophesied return now face a crushing reality. 70 years of exile, promised by Jeremiah, stretch into 80, then 90, with no end in sight. Daniel, once certain of God's plan, sits alone in his chamber, reading and rereading the sacred scrolls. The writing on the wall spoke of Babylon's end, yet the city stands stronger than ever. Young Jewish scribes approach the old prophet with questions that cut like knives. Teacher, were the prophets wrong? Does God's word sometimes fail? Marriages between Jewish exiles and Babylonians increase year by year. Children grow up speaking Aramaic better than Hebrew. The temple songs become lullabies sung by grandmothers who remember Jerusalem like a half-forgotten dream. Slowly, quietly, God's chosen people begin to disappear into the great melting pot of empire. Some Jews embrace Babylonian ways completely. They take new names, worship new gods, and climb high in government service. Why cling to promises that never come true when real success waits for those wise enough to adapt? These families move to better neighborhoods and send their children to the finest schools. Others retreat deeper into their faith, creating secret schools where Hebrew is still taught and ancient laws still followed. They meet in hidden rooms, whispering prayers and keeping alive the memory of a homeland their children have never seen. These faithful ones grow more isolated with each passing year. A few young radicals speak of armed rebellion, of striking at Babylon from within. But what can a handful of exiles do against the empire that defeated mighty Persia? Their plots are discovered quickly, and the plotters disappear into Babylon's vast prison system. Ezekiel's prophecies of restoration become subjects of fierce debate. Did the prophets speak of spiritual return rather than physical homecoming? Must the people of God learn to bloom in foreign soil? The questions multiply like thorns, and every answer seems to birth new doubts. As decades pass, the very idea of return becomes something told in stories, like tales of dragons or heroes from long ago. Chapter 6: The Empire that Devoured Alexander. 3 centuries later, a young king from Macedonia stands at the edge of the known world, his eyes blazing with dreams of conquest. Alexander has crushed the Persian Empire, scattered the armies of Darius, and claimed the title of Great King. But ahead of him rises a challenge his tutors never described: Babylon, the city that never fell. Where history remembers Persian weakness, Alexander faces Babylonian strength. The empire that absorbed Jewish exiles has also absorbed Persian military tactics, Greek philosophy, and Egyptian engineering. Babylon's walls now bristle with new weapons and defenses learned from every conquered foe. Alexander's war machine, unstoppable across 3 continents, meets its match in siege warfare. The Macedonian phalanx, perfect for open battle, struggles against defenders who rain fire from impossible heights. Greek siege engines, advanced for their time, shatter against walls improved by centuries of continuous development. The young conqueror finds himself trapped in a siege that stretches months, then years. His soldiers, homesick after decades of campaign, begin to whisper of mutiny. The gold that funded his eastern march runs low as Babylon's merchants control trade routes Alexander cannot break. Inside the city, Babylonian generals study Greek tactics and adapt them for their own use. They recruit mercenaries from Alexander's own ranks, offering better pay and shorter service. Some of Macedonia's finest warriors change sides, teaching Babylonian forces the secrets of Greek warfare. Alexander himself falls ill during the siege, weakened by wounds and stress. Some whisper that Babylonian priests have cursed the invader. Others claim the city's gods protect it from foreign conquest. When the great conqueror dies outside Babylon's gates, his empire crumbles like a house built on sand. Greek culture still spreads eastward, but it mixes with Babylonian wisdom instead of replacing it. Libraries preserve both Homer's epics and Mesopotamian creation myths. Schools teach geometry alongside astrology. The fusion creates something new and strange. Without Alexander's eastern conquests, the Hellenistic world develops differently. Trade routes shift. Political alliances form around different centers of power. The ancient world's balance tips in directions no one could predict. Chapter 7: Rome's Eastern Nightmare. 5 centuries after Babylon's survival, Roman legions march eastward with eagles gleaming and dreams of empire burning in their hearts. They have conquered Gaul, crushed Carthage, and absorbed Greece. Now they turn toward the wealth of the East, expecting easy victories over decadent Oriental kingdoms. Instead, they find Babylon. The city that survived Alexander has grown into something Rome never anticipated. Babylonian armies combine Roman discipline with Persian mobility, Greek technology with Eastern mysticism. Their cavalry rides horses bred in distant steppes, while their infantry wields weapons forged from techniques learned across continents. Roman generals, trained to fight Celtic warriors and Germanic tribes, struggle against siege warfare perfected over millennia. Babylon's engineers flood valleys, divert rivers, and turn the landscape itself into a weapon. Roman roads, built for rapid movement, become death traps when Babylonian forces control the territories they cross. Marcus Licinius Crassus leads 7 legions against Babylon's outer territories and vanishes completely. Some say his army was destroyed by Babylonian fire weapons. Others whisper that his soldiers were absorbed into Babylon's foreign legion, where Roman discipline serves Eastern masters. The East becomes Rome's bleeding wound. legion after legion marches toward Mesopotamia and never returns. The Senate debates whether to continue eastern expansion or fortify existing borders. Some senators argue for alliance with Babylon against common enemies like Parthian raiders or Germanic tribes. Political chaos erupts in Rome as military failures mount. Generals who promise eastern victories rise to power, only to fall when their armies disappear into Babylonian territory. The triumvirate system emerges partly from this eastern crisis, as no single leader can handle both domestic politics and the Babylonian threat. Caesar himself considers Eastern campaign, but ultimately turns toward Gaul and Britain instead. His commentaries mention Babylon with respect, bordering on fear. Their city makes Rome seem like a village, and their armies like our auxiliaries. Without Eastern expansion, Roman development takes different paths. More resources flow toward northern frontiers. Celtic and Germanic cultures survive longer under less pressure. The empire grows in different directions, creating alternative patterns of civilization that reshape European development. Trade agreements replace military conquest. Roman merchants learn Babylonian languages and customs. Eastern luxuries flow westward through negotiated contracts rather than conquered territories. Chapter 8. The Jesus that never was. The hills of Galilee lie quiet in a world where prophecy failed and God's people never returned home. Without the Second Temple, without Ezra's reforms, without the messianic expectations born from exile and return, Judaism develops along completely different paths. Jewish communities scattered across Babylon, Egypt, and Asia Minor adapt to permanent diaspora. They build synagogues that serve as cultural centers rather than temporary substitutes for the temple. Their prayers speak of spiritual homeland rather than physical return. Young rabbis debate philosophy more than prophecy. In this world, no child named Jesus grows up in Nazareth, hearing stories of David's throne and Isaiah's suffering servant. The messianic ideas that would have shaped his ministry never crystallize into revolutionary hope. The social conditions that produced first-century Jewish unrest never emerge. If a teacher named Jesus exists in this timeline, he remains a local rabbi, discussing ethics and wisdom with village followers. No crowds gather to hear about God's kingdom breaking into history. No disciples abandon their nets to follow a Messiah who will restore Israel's glory. The Greek philosophical schools that might have blended with Jewish monotheism develop along purely secular lines. Stoicism and Platonism evolve without pressure from messianic claims about divine love and ultimate justice. Mystery religions flourish in Mediterranean cities, but they remain focused on personal salvation rather than cosmic transformation. Without Christianity's challenge, Roman religious policy stays flexible and inclusive. Emperors continue to claim divine honors without facing monotheistic resistance. The persecution cycles that would have strengthened Christian resolve never begin. The theology that would have shaped Western civilization remains unborn. Paul of Tarsus, if he exists, remains a Pharisee serving in some Babylonian Jewish community. His brilliant mind turns toward legal scholarship rather than missionary activity. The letters that would have become New Testament scripture are never written. The Mediterranean world develops alternative spiritual movements. Egyptian mystery cults spread northward. Persian dualistic ideas influence Greek thought. But the fusion of Jewish ethics, Greek philosophy, and Roman organization that would have produced Christianity never happens. By the 4th century, when Constantine might have embraced Christianity, the emperor instead patronizes philosophical schools and traditional cults. The fusion of church and state that would have shaped medieval Europe never occurs. Chapter 9. Islam's impossible birth. 6 centuries after Christ should have been born, the Arabian Peninsula burns under different suns. Without Jewish and Christian foundations, without Abraham's covenant passed down through generations of exile and return, the religious landscape of the Near East develops along entirely different lines. Muhammad ibn Abdullah, if he is born at all in this timeline, grows up in a Mecca where monotheistic ideas remain foreign imports rather than familiar concepts. Jewish tribes in Medina follow Babylonian Judaism, focused on law and community rather than messianic hope. Christian merchants are absent because Christianity never emerged. The spiritual crisis that drives Muhammad to the cave of Hira either never comes or takes completely different forms. Without Abraham, Moses, and Jesus as predecessors, the concept of progressive revelation has no foundation. The Quran, if it exists, must build monotheism from scratch rather than correcting earlier scriptures. Arabian tribal religion continues its ancient patterns. The Kaaba remains a shrine to multiple deities. Pilgrimage traditions develop around older gods. Poetry celebrates tribal virtues rather than universal submission to one creator. The social reforms that Islam brought to women, slaves, and the poor never emerge from religious motivation. Without Islamic expansion, Persia continues under Zoroastrian influence mixed with Babylonian elements. The Sassanid Empire faces different pressures and may survive in altered form. Byzantine territories develop without Islamic challenge, possibly leading to different relationships with European kingdoms. The great libraries of Baghdad are never built because Baghdad itself may never become a center of Islamic learning. The translation movement that preserved Greek philosophy and science takes alternative forms, if it happens at all. Mathematical and astronomical advances follow different patterns under different cultural pressures. Trade routes across Arabia and the Indian Ocean develop under different religious and political influences. Without Islamic commercial law and customs, merchant networks organize around other principles. The connections between Europe, Africa, and Asia form through different cultural channels. Spain remains Visigothic or falls to other conquerors. The brilliant fusion of Islamic, Christian, and Jewish learning in Cordoba never happens. European intellectual development must find other sources for the Greek texts and Eastern knowledge that Islamic scholars would have preserved and transmitted. North African Christianity, if it exists, faces different challenges without Islamic expansion. Coptic Egypt and Ethiopian Christianity develop under alternative influences. Chapter 10. The Crusades that never happened. The medieval world awakens to entirely different conflicts as Europe emerges from the Dark Ages. Without Christianity's hold on imagination, without Islam's control of holy lands, without the theological tensions that drove centuries of religious warfare, the politics of the Mediterranean develop around secular rather than sacred concerns. European knights seek glory and land through different adventures. Some join expeditions against pagan tribes in northern forests. Others sail west earlier, discovering new worlds without religious motivation. The military orders that would have become Templars and Hospitallers instead organize around protection of trade routes or royal service. Byzantine emperors face different Eastern threats. Without Islamic pressure, they may rebuild strength and recover lost territories through conventional warfare. The Fourth Crusade, that would have sacked Constantinople, never happens, leaving the Eastern Empire stronger and more stable. Technological development follows alternative paths. The military innovations spurred by siege warfare in the Holy Land emerge from different conflicts. Castles evolve for different purposes. Naval technology develops through exploration and trade rather than pilgrim transport and religious war. Economic patterns shift dramatically. Without pilgrim routes to Jerusalem, European trade flows along different channels. Italian city-states build wealth through alternative commerce. Banking develops for secular rather than religious purposes. The military orders never become Europe's first international banking system. Cultural exchange happens through merchants and scholars rather than warriors and pilgrims. Arabic numerals and Eastern knowledge reach Europe through different channels, possibly slower or faster, depending on political relationships. Universities develop around different texts and traditions. The legend cycles that celebrated crusading knights tell different stories. Arthurian romance focuses on secular chivalry. Epic poetry celebrates exploration, love, and honor rather than holy war. The ideal of the Christian knight evolves into something purely military and social. Without the trauma of religious warfare, Jewish communities in Europe develop under different pressures. Some face persecution for economic reasons, but not for theological ones. The peculiar mixture of protection and oppression that characterized medieval Jewish life takes alternative forms. The Renaissance, when it comes, responds to different intellectual and spiritual crises. Without the need to recover from religious warfare, without the particular tensions between faith and reason created by centuries of holy war, European intellectual development follows alternative patterns that may lead to earlier or later scientific revolution. Chapter 11: The Forbidden Scrolls of Babylon. Deep beneath the ruins of modern Iraq, archaeologists working in secret uncover chambers that should not exist. In 1987, during the chaos of the Iran-Iraq War, a damaged building in Baghdad reveals a hidden vault containing cuneiform tablets that tell impossible stories about Jewish exile and Babylonian destiny. These texts, written in languages that blend Hebrew, Aramaic, and Akkadian, describe prophecies that support Babylon's eternal rule rather than its destruction. According to these forbidden manuscripts, Daniel's vision of the statue meant something entirely different. The head of gold was not just Nebuchadnezzar, but Babylon's eternal nature as the divine kingdom that would absorb and transform all other empires. Dr. Sarah Chen, a biblical archaeologist, risks her career by publishing preliminary findings about these tablets. She claims they contain alternative versions of familiar biblical stories, written from Babylonian perspectives by Jewish scribes who came to see their exile as divine destiny rather than punishment. One tablet describes Ezekiel's vision of the Valley of Dry Bones, but the bones represent Babylon's enemies rather than Israel's restoration. Another contains Jeremiah's words, but spoken in support of Babylonian rule as God's permanent judgment on rebellious nations. These texts suggest that some Jewish exiles came to believe their captivity was not temporary trial, but eternal calling. Religious authorities from multiple faiths condemn Chen's research as fabrication or misinterpretation. The Vatican issues statements questioning the authenticity of tablets that contradict established biblical narrative. Jewish scholarly organizations distance themselves from findings that suggest their ancestors willingly abandoned hope of return. But the tablets keep appearing in museums and private collections. Carbon dating confirms their ancient origin. Linguistic analysis supports their authenticity. Archaeological context suggests they were hidden during Persian invasions, preserved by scribes who feared their controversial message would be destroyed. The most shocking tablet contains what appears to be an alternative version of Isaiah's prophecies. Instead of predicting Babylon's fall, this version describes the city as God's eternal dwelling place on earth, destined to gather all nations under its golden towers. The familiar words, "Comfort, comfort my people," refer not to return from exile, but to acceptance of permanent integration into Babylon's multicultural empire. If these texts are authentic, they suggest that biblical literature underwent massive editing during the Persian period to conform with the political reality of return and restoration. The voices of Jews who found spiritual home in Babylon were silenced and their writings hidden. Chapter 12. The Daniel Deception. Biblical scholars gathering in shadowed corners of academic conferences whisper about research that could shatter faith foundations across the world. The Book of Daniel, cornerstone of apocalyptic literature and prophetic accuracy, shows signs of composition that challenge everything believers assume about divine revelation. Dr. Michael Hoffman, professor of ancient Near Eastern studies at Yale, presents evidence that Daniel's prophecies were written after the events they claim to predict. Linguistic analysis reveals vocabulary and concepts that didn't exist during the Babylonian period. The detailed descriptions of Persian, Greek, and Roman empires suggest knowledge only available to later writers. If Daniel was composed during the Maccabean period, around 165 BCE, then its prophecies about Babylon's fall were actually historical descriptions written as predictions. This means the writing on the wall, the interpretation of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, and the vision of successive empires were literary devices rather than supernatural revelations. The implications explode through religious communities. If Daniel's prophecies were backdated, how can believers trust other biblical predictions? If Jewish scribes created false prophecies to support their theology, what other biblical books might be literary fiction presented as divine truth? Conservative scholars fight back with defensive research. They argue that linguistic evidence is inconclusive, that ancient texts often contain anachronisms through later copying errors. They point to archaeological discoveries that support some Daniel stories, suggesting the book contains authentic memories, even if later editors shaped the final text. But the damage spreads through seminary classrooms and Sunday school lessons. Young pastors struggle with questions about biblical inerrancy. Theology students wonder whether their faith rests on ancient fiction rather than historical fact. The foundations of prophetic interpretation begin to crack. Alternative theories emerge to explain Daniel's composition. Some scholars suggest the book combines authentic ancient traditions with later theological reflection. Others propose multiple authors working across several centuries. A few radical voices claim the entire Hebrew Bible underwent systematic editing to create false historical narratives. The controversy reaches beyond academia into popular religion. Television evangelists denounce liberal scholars who attack God's word. Best-selling books promise to defend Daniel's authenticity. Faith communities split between those who demand scholarly engagement and those who reject academic criticism entirely. Meanwhile, the forbidden Babylonian tablets discovered by Dr. Chen seem to support theories about literary composition and political editing. If Jewish scribes in Babylon wrote theological literature supporting their permanent exile, then other Jewish scribes in Jerusalem might have written competing literature supporting their return and restoration. Chapter 13. Zoroaster's Shadow Empire. In the mountains of ancient Persia, a prophet named Zoroaster proclaimed truths that should have transformed the world. His teachings about the cosmic battle between good and evil, about final judgment and resurrection, about heaven and hell, contained ideas that would have revolutionized human religious thought. But in our alternate timeline, these concepts die with Persian military defeat. Without Cyrus's conquest spreading Zoroastrian ideas westward, the Persian religion remains confined to its homeland. The theological concepts that historically influenced Judaism during the exile period never penetrate Jewish thought. Ideas about Satan as God's opponent, about resurrection of the dead, about final judgment separating righteous from wicked, remain foreign to Jewish theology. Dr. James Morrison, studying comparative religion at Oxford, argues that Judaism, without Persian influence, would have remained focused on collective rather than individual salvation. The concept of personal afterlife, central to later Jewish, Christian, and Islamic thought, might never have developed beyond vague ideas about Sheol as a shadowy underworld. Zoroastrian fire temples continue their ancient rituals in isolated Persian communities, but their influence never spreads to Mediterranean cultures. The symbolic importance of light versus darkness, fire as divine presence, and purification rituals remain confined to their original cultural context. Greek philosophy develops without Persian dualistic concepts to challenge or inspire new synthesis. Platonic ideas about souls trapped in material bodies lack the reinforcement they would have received from Persian teachings about spiritual warfare. The fusion of Greek metaphysics and Persian ethics that would have shaped later theological development never occurs. Roman mystery religions, deprived of Persian influence, focus more heavily on Egyptian and Greek elements. The Mithraic mysteries, popular among Roman soldiers, either never develop or take completely different forms. Solar worship and bull sacrifice follow alternative ritual patterns without Zoroastrian theological foundations. Early Christian theology, if Christianity exists at all in this timeline, lacks the Persian concepts that would have shaped ideas about demons, angels, and cosmic conflict. The dramatic narrative of spiritual warfare between God and Satan remains undeveloped. Christian cosmology, deprived of Persian influence, might focus more on Greek philosophical concepts about the divine nature. The absence of Zoroastrian influence affects Islamic theology as well. The Quranic understanding of Iblis as a cosmic tempter, the detailed descriptions of paradise and hell, the emphasis on final judgment and resurrection, all lose their Persian theological foundations. Medieval European Christianity develops without the rich angelology and demonology that Persian ideas would have contributed. The elaborate hierarchies of angels and demons that fascinated medieval theologians never emerge. Religious art and literature take different directions without these supernatural concepts to explore. Chapter 14: The Gnostic Revolution. In the spiritual vacuum left by absent monotheistic religions, mystery schools and esoteric traditions flourish across the Mediterranean world. Without Christianity to suppress them as heresies, Gnostic movements develop into sophisticated religious systems that offer alternative paths to divine knowledge and salvation. The schools of Alexandria become centers for mystical learning that blends Egyptian, Greek, and Mesopotamian wisdom traditions. Teachers like Valentinus develop complex mythologies about divine emanations and cosmic hierarchy without needing to disguise their ideas as Christian theology. Students gather in grand academies rather than secret meeting rooms. Hermes Trismegistus, the legendary figure combining Greek Hermes and Egyptian Thoth, becomes the focus of elaborate religious movements rather than underground occult traditions. Hermetic literature spreads openly, teaching that human souls contain divine sparks that can be awakened through proper knowledge and practice. Platonic philosophy evolves into religious practice as Neoplatonic schools develop meditation techniques and mystical disciplines. Without Christian opposition, these schools attract students from across the Roman Empire. They build temples dedicated to abstract principles like truth, beauty, and the good. Egyptian mystery traditions, freed from competition with Christian monasticism, develop sophisticated theology around Isis and Osiris. These cults offer elaborate initiation rituals that promise transformation and immortality. Their priests become influential advisors to Roman emperors and provincial governors. Persian Mithraism, modified by the absence of Zoroastrian theological pressure, develops into solar religion with mass appeal. Mithras temples appear in major cities, offering military-style discipline and brotherhood to civilian populations. Women create parallel organizations devoted to solar goddesses. The fusion of Greek rational thought and Eastern mystical experience produces philosophical schools that emphasize direct spiritual experience over revealed truth. Students learn techniques for achieving altered consciousness, prophetic vision, and union with divine principles. These alternative religious movements influence art, literature, and social organization. Without Christian emphasis on suffering and sacrifice, Mediterranean spirituality focuses more on transformation and enlightenment. Religious architecture emphasizes beauty and harmony rather than humility and penitence. Political leadership takes different forms when rulers can claim divine status without monotheistic challenge. Emperor worship develops more sophisticated theological foundations. Court ceremonial incorporates mystical elements designed to manifest divine presence through human authority. Chapter 15. The Templars' Lost Treasure. In medieval Europe, where Christianity never conquered pagan wisdom traditions, secret societies develop around entirely different mysteries and knowledge systems. The Knights Templar, if they exist in this timeline, seek not the Holy Grail, but the lost technologies and magical secrets of immortal Babylon. According to suppressed historical documents, crusading knights returning from failed expeditions to the east bring tales of Babylonian libraries containing astronomical calculations, alchemical formulas, and engineering secrets that surpass European knowledge. These treasures become the focus of secretive brotherhoods dedicated to recovering ancient wisdom. The Order of the Golden Tower, a mysterious organization mentioned in encrypted manuscripts, allegedly establishes contact with Babylonian scholars who preserve pre-flood knowledge in hidden chambers beneath their eternal city. European knights and scholars risk everything to gain access to mathematical principles, architectural techniques, and metallurgical secrets that could revolutionize medieval technology. Brother Francis of Assisi, in this timeline, a scholar knight rather than a monk, writes coded letters describing Babylonian workshops where craftsmen create mechanical devices that move without wind or water power. These automata, powered by principles unknown to European science, guard temple treasures and perform ritual functions in ceremonies older than recorded history. The Templar treasure, rather than consisting of religious relics, contains technical manuals written in cuneiform script, astronomical instruments that predict celestial events with impossible accuracy, and samples of Babylonian steel that remains sharp after centuries of use. European smiths struggle to duplicate these metallurgical achievements. Masonic traditions, emerging from medieval craft guilds, preserve geometric principles learned from Babylonian architects who designed buildings that have stood for over 2 millennia. Cathedral construction across Europe incorporates secret techniques passed down through initiates who journeyed to Babylon and returned with revolutionary knowledge about structural engineering. The suppression of the Templars, when it comes, results not from royal greed for their financial wealth, but from church fear of their technological knowledge. Babylonian wisdom threatens to undermine European feudalism by providing commoners with access to advanced agriculture, medicine, and manufacturing techniques. Surviving Templar documents, hidden in castle walls and monastery cellars, contain alchemical formulas that describe chemical processes unknown to medieval European science. These texts hint at Babylonian achievements in metallurgy, pharmacy, and what modern readers might recognize as early chemistry. The legendary Templar fleet, disappearing after the Order's dissolution, may have carried not gold, but Babylonian scholars and their libraries to secret refuges in Scotland or the New World, where ancient knowledge continues to influence human development through hidden channels. Chapter 16. The technology Babylon built. Modern satellite images of Iraq reveal anomalies that official archaeology cannot explain. Geometric patterns visible only from high altitude suggest massive construction projects buried beneath centuries of sand and rubble. Ground-penetrating radar detects metallic structures too large and too precisely engineered to match known ancient technology. Dr. Elena Vasquez, leading a joint Iraqi-European archaeological expedition, discovers that continuous Babylonian civilization preserved and developed technologies lost to other ancient cultures. In underground chambers sealed for over 2 millennia, her team finds bronze gears cut with precision-matching modern machine tools, glass lenses ground to mathematical perfection, and metallurgical evidence of alloys that require high-temperature furnaces. The famous Hanging Gardens, rather than being purely decorative, apparently served as testing grounds for hydraulic engineering that could have revolutionized ancient agriculture. Computer modeling of the discovered pipe systems reveals pressure calculations that wouldn't be redeveloped in Europe until the Renaissance. Some bronze pipes show wear patterns suggesting they operated continuously for centuries. Babylonian astronomical instruments, preserved in sealed temple vaults, contain gear ratios that accurately predict planetary movements, solar eclipses, and stellar positions. The mathematical sophistication exceeds Greek astronomical achievements by several centuries. Some devices incorporate differential gears not reinvented until modern clockmaking. Chemical analysis of Babylonian concrete samples reveals composition that remains harder and more durable than modern equivalents. The city's walls and foundations, after 2,500 years of continuous use, show less structural damage than Roman buildings half their age. The engineering principles behind this durability remain partially mysterious. Electronic scanning of Babylonian cuneiform tablets reveals texts describing medical procedures, chemical processes, and mechanical principles that suggest systematic scientific methodology. These documents describe controlled experiments, mathematical proofs, and technical specifications written with precision matching modern technical manuals. The most shocking discovery involves evidence of long-distance communication systems. Babylonian texts describe signal networks using mirrors, fire beacons, and trained birds that could carry messages across the empire faster than horse relay. Archaeological evidence suggests these systems operated with efficiency, matching telegraph networks. Modern Iraqi engineers studying Babylonian irrigation systems find design principles that could revolutionize desert agriculture. The ancient techniques for managing water flow, soil preservation, and crop rotation remain superior to many contemporary methods. International agricultural organizations quietly implement Babylonian innovations in development projects across Africa and Asia. Chapter 17: Geopolitics without God. The modern Middle East, shaped by millennia without major monotheistic religions, develops political structures and international relationships that Western observers struggle to understand. Without Jewish, Christian, or Islamic foundations, regional conflicts follow completely different fault lines based on ethnic identity, technological advantage, and resource control rather than religious doctrine. The state that occupies ancient Mesopotamia operates as a technocratic republic where political leadership depends on mastery of engineering, mathematics, and administrative science rather than religious authority or military conquest. This Babylonian successor state maintains political stability through merit-based governance systems refined over centuries of continuous development. Regional conflicts center around water rights and trade route control rather than religious sites and theological differences. The absence of Jerusalem as a contested holy city eliminates one major source of international tension. Palestine develops as a secular region where different ethnic groups compete for agricultural land and commercial opportunities without religious nationalism to inflame disputes. Oil economics follow alternative patterns when petroleum extraction occurs without the religious and cultural tensions that historically complicate Middle Eastern energy politics. International energy companies negotiate with governments that prioritize technical expertise and economic development over religious law and cultural purity. The geopolitical balance between East and West takes different forms when cultural exchange happens through scholarly and commercial relationships rather than religious pilgrimage and holy warfare. European Middle Eastern relations develop around secular concerns like trade agreements, technological cooperation, and territorial sovereignty. Regional powers ally based on practical rather than religious considerations. Turkey's position as a bridge between Europe and Asia depends on geographic and economic factors rather than its role as a former Islamic caliphate. Iran's regional influence flows from Persian cultural identity and natural resources rather than Shiite theology. International terrorism, when it emerges, focuses on ethnic nationalism, economic inequality, and political oppression rather than religious martyrdom and holy war. Security threats require different countermeasures when motivation comes from secular grievances rather than theological imperatives. The Arab world, without Islamic unity as an organizing principle, develops along tribal and national lines that create different patterns of cooperation and conflict. Pan-Arab nationalism takes alternative forms when based on language and culture rather than shared religious identity. Israel, if it exists in this timeline, emerges from secular Zionist movements focused on ethnic homeland and cultural revival rather than religious prophecy and divine promise. The absence of religious motivation might make territorial compromises easier or harder depending on alternative identity factors. Chapter 18: The Digital Babylon. Silicon Valley operates according to different ethical principles when technological development happens without Judeo-Christian moral foundations. The absence of concepts like universal human dignity, individual soul value, and divine image in humanity leads to alternative approaches in artificial intelligence design, privacy protection, and social media governance. Tech companies developing AI systems base their ethical frameworks on philosophical traditions derived from Greek Stoicism, Roman law, and Eastern wisdom traditions, rather than biblical concepts about human nature and moral responsibility. This leads to different priorities in machine learning algorithms and automated decision-making systems. Social media platforms organize human interaction according to principles derived from ancient Babylonian approaches to multicultural empire management, rather than Christian concepts about community, forgiveness, and redemption. The emphasis falls on efficient administration and conflict management, rather than moral transformation and spiritual growth. Digital surveillance systems develop with fewer privacy protections when cultural foundations lack concepts about individual souls being sacred to divine authority. The balance between security and privacy tilts differently when philosophical foundations emphasize social harmony over individual rights derived from theological anthropology. Cryptocurrency and blockchain technology evolve according to economic theories influenced by ancient Mesopotamian approaches to trade, contract law, and monetary systems, rather than Christian teachings about usury, just price, and economic justice. This creates different approaches to financial inequality and wealth distribution. Virtual reality and augmented reality technologies develop with different goals when cultural foundations emphasize transcendence through knowledge and technical mastery, rather than through moral transformation and spiritual relationship. The virtual worlds created prioritize enlightenment and achievement over redemption and restoration. Biotechnology and genetic engineering proceed with fewer ethical constraints when cultural foundations lack concepts about humans being created in divine image. The modification of human genetics, enhancement of physical and mental capabilities, and extension of natural lifespan face different moral limitations. Global internet governance develops according to principles derived from ancient imperial administration, rather than democratic ideals influenced by Christian concepts about human equality and universal brotherhood. This leads to different approaches to online freedom, content moderation, and information access. The gig economy and automated labor replacement proceed with different social safety nets when cultural foundations emphasize personal achievement and social efficiency rather than caring for the vulnerable based on divine commandment and moral obligation. Chapter 19. What we lost, what we gained. Sitting in silence before the weight of alternative history, we must ask ourselves the questions that cut deepest into the human heart. In this timeline where Babylon never fell, where God's promises seem to fail, where the great religions that shaped our moral imagination never emerged, what does it mean to be human? The Jewish families who never returned home, who watched their children forget Hebrew and embrace Babylonian ways, faced a crisis that echoes through every generation. When the future you were promised never comes, when the God you trusted seems absent, how do you find meaning in the life you actually live rather than the life you expected? Perhaps there is profound beauty in learning to bloom where you are planted, even in foreign soil. The Jewish communities that thrived in Babylon, that contributed their wisdom to the great multicultural experiment of empire, discovered that homeland can be a state of heart rather than geographic location. Their descendants became bridges between worlds, translators of wisdom, creators of new forms of beauty. But what did humanity lose without the moral revolution that monotheistic religions would have brought? Without the radical idea that every human soul has infinite worth in divine eyes, would slavery have ended as quickly? Without the prophetic voice crying for justice for orphans and widows, would social reform have emerged from other sources? The technological advances preserved in never-fallen Babylon might have accelerated human progress by centuries. Medical knowledge, engineering principles, and scientific methods developed through continuous civilization could have prevented countless deaths and reduced human suffering. Perhaps the absence of religious warfare would have created space for pure research and intellectual development. Yet something ineffable seems missing from this alternate world. The hope that sustains humans through darkest suffering, the love that transforms enemies into family, the forgiveness that breaks cycles of violence and revenge. Where do these emerge without prophetic voices proclaiming divine love for broken humanity? In our timeline, we know both the beauty and the terror of religious faith. We have seen crusades and inquisitions, but also hospitals and schools, martyrs and saints, art and music that reach toward transcendence. We have witnessed faith inspiring both horrible cruelty and incredible compassion. The human heart seems to hunger for something beyond material satisfaction and intellectual achievement. Even in secular societies, people create meaning systems that function like religions. They sacrifice for causes larger than themselves, worship ideologies or celebrities, and seek transcendence through art, nature, or human love. Chapter 20. The Prophecy That Waits. But what if our journey through this alternate timeline has revealed only the surface of a deeper mystery? What if the story of Babylon that never fell contains secrets that connect to our own world in ways we never imagined? Dr. Sarah Chen's discovery of the forbidden tablets leads to more questions than answers. Carbon dating reveals that some tablets are far older than any known Babylonian writing, possibly predating Sumerian civilization itself. The mathematical concepts encoded in their astronomical calculations describe cosmic cycles that extend thousands of years into the future. The most mysterious tablet, written in a script that combines elements from multiple ancient languages, contains what appears to be a prophecy about the final empire that rises when all others have fallen. According to preliminary translations, this empire will not be built by human hands, but will emerge from the marriage of earth and stars, of flesh and lightning, of mind and machine. Modern computer analysis of Babylonian astronomical data reveals that their ancient calculations predict celestial alignments that will occur in our near future with accuracy that surpasses current scientific models. Some researchers whisper that Babylonian priests possessed knowledge about cosmic forces that modern physics is only beginning to understand. Strange electromagnetic anomalies detected at archaeological sites suggest that certain Babylonian structures continue to function according to principles beyond current technological understanding. Underground chambers pulse with energy signatures that don't match any known natural phenomena. Local inhabitants report dreams and visions that seem to originate from these ancient installations. If the Babylonians preserved pre-flood technology and knowledge, if their civilization maintained continuous contact with wisdom traditions that stretch back to humanity's earliest days, then perhaps their survival was meant to prepare for something yet to come. The final tablet speaks of a time when the children of exile will remember their true home when the towers of earth reach toward the dwellings of gods, when the ancient wisdom awakens in minds made ready by trials beyond counting. Could this prophecy refer not to ancient return from Babylonian captivity, but to humanity's future transformation through technologies that merge consciousness with cosmic forces? Recent discoveries in quantum physics and consciousness research echo descriptions found in the oldest Babylonian texts. The boundaries between mind and matter, between individual awareness and universal consciousness, seem less solid than previous science assumed. Perhaps the ancients understood realities that modern civilization is only beginning to rediscover. As we close this journey through alternative history, one question burns brighter than all others. What if the prophecy that seemed to fail in ancient times was never meant for then at all? What if everything we have discovered points toward a future when humanity finally becomes what it was always meant to be? The mystery deepens. The ancient towers still rise towards stars that hold secrets we have barely begun to fathom. And somewhere in the space between what was, what might have been, and what yet could be, the greatest story of all continues to unfold.